Good morning, everyone. George Christie here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of the Growing Forward webinar series, where we look to cover all things vineyard related. Today's session is titled Emerging Irrigation Practices and Technologies in the Vineyard. And as the title indicates, we're going to be looking at the technology impact on irrigation in particular. And we're going to uncover some of the abilities to better control how much water goes where, our ability to measure vine health, vine stress, and even its impact on managing labor costs. Before we begin, just a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors, presenting sponsor, Verdi, who are going to be joined with our session sponsors, Droppoint Automation and Turrentine Brokerage. Thank you, Verdi. Thank you, Droppoint Automation, and thank you, Turrentine, for all your support. It's the support of those sponsors that allows us to continue to provide good content and good information like this to you guys for free. So thank you. Another thing, as a reminder, we always pre-record these sessions a few days in advance. We do that for quality purposes, but we also do it to allow for as much interaction as possible. So as you're watching the broadcast, you can go ahead and type those questions into the chat room, because our speakers are watching the broadcast right alongside with you. So they'll be taking those questions on as they come in. So you don't need to wait until the end of the presentation to ask questions like you might do in an in-person conference. So please take advantage of that. Okay, I think that about covers it. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors. Of course, I want to thank our presenters today, and I want to thank you and our audience for joining us. We know how busy everyone is. I'm going to hand it off to Arthur Chen, who's the CEO and co-founder of Verdi. Arthur is going to lead today's discussion. Arthur, take it away.
This session is sponsored by Droppoint Automation, keeping vineyard irrigation simple through automated monitoring and control from the palm of your hand. And Turrentine Brokerage, guiding clients through supply cycles for 50 years.
Hi everyone, my name is Roman Kozak, CTO and founder of Verdi. We make it easy to implement and manage a variable rate strategy for your vineyard. Our technology can break up your existing irrigation zones into as many subzones as is needed to match the variability of your field, whether that's based on soil type, terrain, or interplanting. Then we can direct more water to the areas that need it and restrict water to the areas that don't need it as much. So if you have vineyard blocks that look like the one above, we can help you make them look like the one below. And there are a lot of benefits to doing this, such as increased revenue per acre due to quality improvements, a restriction in water usage, as well as a single harvest pass. Verdi also engineers the most affordable irrigation automation solution for vineyards. The Verdi block controller installs in minutes and brings your existing valves, pumps, and sensors online for automation, monitoring, remote control, and alerts. Everything is simple to use from your desktop or your mobile phone. So if you would like to learn more, we would love to chat, so please reach out and we'll see you in the field soon.
Great. Well, thank you, George, for that introduction here. We're really excited to be here today, and welcome to our panel discussion. My name is Arthur, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Verdi, which is also the presenting sponsor for today's Growing Forward conference. And we're making modern automation tools accessible to every grower. Now, our session today is focused on discussing emerging irrigation practices and technologies in the vineyard. There's a lot of innovation taking place these days to address challenges in water management in a vineyard, especially how it relates to broader trends for data-driven decision-making for grape growing. Today, we're privileged to bring together a group of innovators from industry and academia who are working at the very cutting edge of research and technology and have decades of experience in viticulture, grape growing, and research in this area. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Let's start off with introductions from each of our panelists. Sarah, would you like to start us off with a quick introduction on your background?
Sure, thank you, Arthur. I'm Sarah Ferguson. I am CEO and co-founder of Ruetd. I've been working in the wine industry since 2015 in both cellar and the vineyard side. Started our own company last year, where we're helping growers make sense of their data and be able to make informed decisions from information from their vineyards that impact not only irrigation, but also harvest decisions. So I'm really excited to be here and excited for this discussion.
Thanks, Sarah. Really great to have you here. And Michele, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Arthur. I'm Michele Melillo. I'm from Italy, and I live in Italy. But my career started in California. I had an MS degree at UC Davis. I can say I'm proud last student of Nick de Cusinan before he went to Gallo. And that was a big exposure to wine grape at that time, but my career is mostly dedicated to table grape, let's say the sister of wine grape. And been advisor for most of my career. 5 years ago, I joined Sunward. It's a California-based company who is a breeding company producing mostly table grape varieties and licensing those varieties around the world. So I'm VP of Global Technical Services for that company. And we have a team of agronomists all around the world, and we support growers trying to improve their performance. And also during my career as advisor, irrigation played a big part of the performance of the vineyard. So, and that's probably I take the angle of the table grape in this discussion. So, but I think that's going to be useful. And thanks for Arthur to inviting me.
Thanks for joining, Michele, and thanks for that introduction as well. Luca, do you want to talk about your background now?
Yes, everyone. My name is Luca Brillante. I'm an associate professor at Fresno State, where I'm also the Bronco Wine Company chair in Viticulture. I come from an agriculture family, and I've been working with grapes for the last 15 years, mostly on research side. I manage the Innovitis lab at Fresno State, which is a lab which is focused on the development of new technologies to help growers manage vineyards in a more modern and efficient ways, not only this from an input standpoint, but also from an operational standpoint. So we develop sensors and new technologies to map vineyards and take decisions about that.
Thanks, Luca. Really great to have you here as well. So yeah, we have a great sort of group of panelists here today with a lot of diverse experiences in viticulture and in the industry. So with today's panel, we really want to start off by talking about the state of the art. And we're going to start from the first part of that process, which is the state of the art for collecting data in the vineyard, especially with regards to collecting data on water requirements of our crops. So to the panel, our first question here is, what methods of monitoring water demand and crop water stress are you seeing being used today? Are there clear winners in terms of accuracy and effectiveness? And what are you seeing come as, methods that are up and coming out of research and development here? So multifaceted question, but let's just start off here. Luca, I know you're doing a lot of great work through your research group. Do you want to start by talking about that and how you're seeing growers leverage data?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, we have collaborating with your company in the last 3 years. We set up a variable rate irrigation system in order to try to bring some of the information that we can acquire in the field into an actual decision point that can water in a variable rate according to the vineyard conditions at the local scale. We have used data that the growers have already acquired over the years, water potentials mostly combined with soil and canopy information, as well as with, of course, with the irrigation flow rates recorded normally by irrigators, but otherwise with more modern systems, in order to try to see if it's possible to produce irrigation scheduling support systems that can tell what block to irrigate and with what amount in order to have a corresponding water stage schedule that makes sense for what are the grape growing decisions. And this has been successful, has been implemented commercially in a couple of vineyards and mostly in California. As well as we have a couple of projects going on in trying to leverage the ability of hyperspectral sensing for the assessment of water status conditions. So there's many companies offering thermal imaging or multispectral imaging. Of course, we are a research lab, and as such, we have the ability of playing with what we think will come next before anybody else. And we're trying to see if specific wavelengths, particularly in the shortwave infrared, which is a region of the light that is not normally considered, but it's very responsive to water content in objects, can actually be used for water status assessment in the field. And we are leveraging these cameras both on autonomous vehicle in the air or on the ground. And ideally, we'll come up with a sensor that can tell what's the amount of water plant by plant. Now, that's not necessarily the focus. We don't aim to be able to irrigate so precisely, but we could try to give some more robust decision tool to the growers that they can use for their current practices.
Thank you, Luca, for sharing that. That's a really great look at all the different kinds of ways to monitor right now and some of the newer ways coming out of that as well. The plant-by-plant monitoring you mentioned is definitely a sort of new area that's starting to become more interesting within the field now. And Sarah and Michele, do you want to add anything to this as well? Anything that you've seen?
Well, I think, Luca, you did a great job. Those tools I've seen, I come from the viticulture side, so working with the data, we're not building sensors, but we're using the information to help growers make recommendations and be able to use that information for irrigation. So you touched on the four kind of main things that I see that growers have data on would be the soil moisture probes, being able to see what water is available to the vines, and using contacts such as soil type and where that soil probe is, using it as a representation for a decision area in the vineyard. And then there's also direct measurements like the leaf water potentials, sap flow that gives a really good representation of the vines, of how stressed they are. And then ET, like sensors in the field that have that. But this is also an area that, as you mentioned, Luca, there's a lot of machine learning, and I know OpenET is a really great example of something that's available for free, and has really great visualizations to monitor ET. And then, of course, like weather data, so a weather station in the field, or it's also another opportunity for computers vision, machine learning. There's apps that are available like Windy. So things that are coming and using more of the machine learning for temperature in a specific area. But the weather stations have definitely been a great source for information for BPD and how hot the vines are feeling. But just wanted to add that section.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. Yeah. And Michele, anything you wanted to add here or talk about?
Yeah. Well, we are a pretty different situation because we deal with thousands of growers all around the world, different environments, different growing practices, different trellis systems. So, and the irrigation world is so scattered in terms of technology that areas or different industry uses. So we try to focus on data that are most widely available. The technologies that Luca mentioned are wonderful, but unfortunately in the table grip industry, at least, it's not available to great majority of farms. But yeah, for sure, soil moisture probes is quite important. Weather data, ETO, absolutely is a must when we need to analyze the irrigation management of farms. And stand water potential also are also taken account. I think lately we are focusing also in trying to correlate these data. They are more linked to irrigation, also with vine performance data that will be yield and canopy, shoot quality. All this data comes into place when we start analyzing the irrigation management of a vineyard.
Thank you, Michele, for talking about that. And I think, double clicking on that one point you mentioned there, having to manage thousands of growers across the world. A lot of growers, even in California, they're managing, very large distributed farms as well, right? We're talking vineyards spread out over hundreds, if not thousands of acres of land. And so a question here that we often hear from growers is, how do we scale data collection in a practical way, right? It's one thing to put one sensor on a farm, but if you have thousands of acres, it is, that one sensor data point doesn't really apply to the rest of your farms here. So to the panelists here, do you have any recommendations for how growers can economically scale data collection efforts?
I think a great effort that farmers need to do is to start managing variability since the start. So that means from the planting and then vineyard design, irrigation design. We need to lower the chance of variability since the beginning. And then, of course, we can also think to type of data that can more effectively manage the variability. I'm not a big fan of single point measurements like soil probes or subflow measurements because you need to use a lot of those hardware to manage the variability of a farm. That's why probably stem water potential, even though it's time consuming, is easier to manage, to use for to manage variability in the farm. Luca mentioned satellite or remote sensing image. I think that's will be very handy to manage the variability in the farm, in the press, and they are also relatively cheap to scale the size of a farm. So I think that's from an applied world, from the real farming, that's probably where we are focusing more now.
Thank you. I'll go next, and I'll just like to point out that it depends on what we want to manage, and managing variability is of course a goal, especially in large blocks. But unfortunately, at this point in time, the industry is still focused on not managing uniformly across different vineyard blocks. So it'd be good if we already are able to have block by block irrigation decisions. That is, a first layer of variability before even going inside the blocks. I like as a tool. I think that one way to scale, because it's in fact the limiting factor into any sort of developing any sort of tools that could help us mapping things, is that unless we find something that's a very strong signal and related to water status in a very direct way, these are all measurements that in some way are indirect, at least for the remote sensing part. And so they have that needs to be calibrated on a block by block, which is also time consuming and needs to be done by skilled operators. One method that I brought to California a few years ago was the use of carbon isotope discrimination, which it's not necessarily a tool that is useful to schedule, because in fact is after the fact. It's a measure on grape juice and tells you the average water status condition on all over the ripening period. So I call it a biochemical data logger. The ability of that is that the nice thing of that is that it will help understanding how the water moves into the plants very easily, because it's done on grape juice, so it's not time constrained as it is for the water potential, and it's fairly straightforward and inexpensive. We're talking about $10 per sample on a on a laboratory. And so it's fairly easily to scale, as the problem that it's not necessarily useful for scheduling, because again, it's something that happens after the fact. And the reason why we're working in hyperspectral imaging is that we thought that could have been a more direct signal. There's work in other crops as well as in grapevine from members of my lab, such Dr. Laroche-Pinel, which has demonstrated the ability of correlating short-wave infrared to water status. We discovering that even in that case is a little bit more challenging than we were thinking about at the forefront. Otherwise, I agree with Michele that it's very hard to scale up with in situ sensors that are on a plant-by-plant basis, even though the investment in these domains are continue to grow from a grower and a startup point of view.
I think also to add on those, in looking at systems for using the information. So it's one, like the scaling of the sensors that are in the field is one side, but I think also something that is important to look at is the systems that we use to actually look at the data and use that data to have informed decisions. And so being efficient in having access to real-time data, but also the historical data, so you can see how things have changed over time. If that's available for the farm or the vineyard, that really helps to see where it's have benchmarks and thresholds of how this year is compared to previous vintages. So setting up systems that are efficient, having trained viticulturists to inform those thresholds is really essential. And I think also just to add to the sampling, like you also both mentioned, picking areas that are good representations and using the tools that are available. So using soil type, using rootstock, using elevation, those different contextual characteristics of the vineyard will really help to set up specific areas that may be more a higher priority for sampling, and then using those as reference points for other sections of the vineyard if multiple sensors aren't available.
Yeah, and these are really great points, Sarah. And I think that's a good segue into the next question here as well, which is, there's a lot of different kinds of data that growers can collect. And especially once they start scaling it, whether that's through imagery or through, brute forcing it with more probes in the field, they're going to have a lot of data coming in from different sources. So, the next question here is really about, how should growers make sense of all this data that they're getting from these different sources, this really big body of data, and what are some of the best practices for helping them to, put in place the easiest steps possible to make that data actually actionable in the vineyard? So Sarah, of course, you've done a lot of work in this, in your current role and also previously as a viticulturist at Silverado. So do you want to start this question off talking about how growers can make sense of their data?
Sure, yes. So to analyze the data for different sources, there are different tools. Excel is definitely the one that is more common in the industry. It's a powerful tool to be able to do statistics, but also to be able to visualize information. There are other tools that do require a little more learning, but BI, business intelligence tools, to be able to make sense of large data groups like Power BI or Tableau. Those are really great tools to use in terms of integrating not only maps, data, so you can see things in real time, and just using the historical context. I keep repeating it, but a number is only as important as the contextual information around it. So even using leaf water potential, I get a lot of value from having someone take those measurements, because not only do we get the value, but we also get the visual cues, like if the shoot tips are slowing, if we have yellow basil leaves. That information is also really helpful in addition to the data that they're collecting.
I can follow up on Sarah's consideration, and I think it's very challenging for growers to make sense of the data. for few reasons. One that is sometimes growers are overwhelmed with the everyday work in the vineyard, and we know how hard is work in the vineyard. So, and really analyzing the data needs time and also calm to and don't have biases to try to read the data. Otherwise, it's you read in the data the answer that you want to get it, but sometimes are different to the answer. So I strongly agree what Sarah said, that we probably need in the industry people that are more skilled to use the data. And for sure, a grower should have an interaction with the agronomist that can see also the bigger picture that the data can say. And probably larger companies need to also make use of data analysts or more with persons roles with specific skills, for sure. And that's a challenge that we have right now and we'll have in the future, the overabundance of data. We have more sensors, more tools that take data. How do we can make sense? Surely artificial intelligence looks like something that can help us, but at the moment this is a promise. It's not something that we can really apply in the vineyards. So as we go forward in the future of data, I think we need to be we need to filter for the data that we really need, that really are significant for the data, and use more resources, like people that know how to manage the data. And in agriculture, it's something that we are a bit lagging behind on that, especially in viticulture, I would say, compared to other crops.
I'll rebound on what Michele said about artificial intelligence, which is one of the focus of the lab. And one of the struggles we have had in working with growers is the fact that both you and Sarah, both Michele and Sarah have mentioned that there's many different data sources. The problem is that there is not a lot of consistency in how the data are acquired. The data are not necessarily clean. We don't know where we pick them up. We don't know when we pick them. And so all this information, what Sarah was saying is contextual information. It's very important because if a grower has interns doing water potentials, as we're talking for irrigation, on a regular basis during the growing season, but the interns don't know where the leaves that were measured came from, don't know at what point of the day. And of course, if you want to correlate with temperatures change, every hour, and even faster than that. So it's important that we are systematic into the collection of data. Now, that's easy for a scientist because that's the basis of science, right? To acquire data in a systematic way in order to draw conclusion. But we cannot expect that if we don't, if growers collect the data in a random fashion, then it will be easy to draw conclusion from these data. So the data needs to be acquisition needs to be planned. One way that, what Michele said, filtering about the data that we need, that's also very important because it's much better to have a few data points that are very well collected in a systematic way than a number of random information that was measured one day but not without follow-up, or was measured inconsistently across the blocks, or so on. So one way that I like is, and Sarah mentioned that, is the ability of locating, I call that smart points, but they can be called in any way. Those are locations that we repeatedly measure into the vineyard all across the growing season, so that it already gives an information because it's much easier to compare from year to year how a different location behaves, and at least in relation to each other, you can draw more easily conclusions. In the long run, that will help build a database that then the growers could use for more advanced techniques. So I think that's consistency and the plan in acquiring data is really key in what is acquired. And growers collect a large number of data, but unfortunately, they are not always well organized or well thought.
Yeah, and these are really great points here. And I think, really echoing that, in the field, talking to growers, that's what, we've heard ourselves, at Verdi, and also what we hear from, other partners within the ecosystem as well. So, very true, I think, all of these things here. Now, we've talked extensively about data and monitoring here, and I see, from our audience, one of the, top questions that has come up is, what about the control side here as well, right? So once we have the data here, once we've decided, how we want to make sense of it, what are the best practices now for, taking action in the field, whether that's with human labor or with automation, what are the best practices that you're seeing out there today? So yeah, want to leave it to you, whoever wants to go first here.
I can speak in terms of using the information to make decisions. And for automation, I think it's really important to evaluate the possibilities. So if there's already a system in place, sometimes those systems have limitations that are difficult for automation, difficult for not for automation, but just have limitations that need to be taken into account, such as certain blocks need to be run at the same time, or you can only get a certain amount of gallons through in a time. So just taking those context into place. So you have that side, but you also have the side if you're building or replanting, the opportunity to make it how you want. And so I think that's a really great opportunity for automation. Again, the other side is great for automation too. Just that they're taking into account what is possible. And then using those data points that we already spoke about in terms of the stress on the vines, the soil moisture that's available, ET, and using those in a systematic way and taking into account priorities and what the goals are for those vineyards and those blocks and making irrigation decisions based on those.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Luca, did you want to go next?
I think that there is opportunities on both ends in the sense that the increase in automation into irrigation management can hopefully allow a more rapid response to the data flow. At this point in time, even the best vineyard, they are still not as equipped in order to really operate. I'm not talking about variable rate, but also just a block by block irrigation decision because of how the irrigation system were designed, right? We're talking about pressures, necessity to irrigate multiple blocks at the same time. So just as a simple example. And so, of course, as we're moving into new systems, this is something that it's important to keep an open door to, because if we think to the lifespan of a vineyard in the next 20, 25 years, hopefully we'll have more efficient solution, not only to understand what's the condition in the vineyard, but also to operate accordingly. So I think the automation offer an opportunity there. We're still at the very early stages, and we have seen automation increasing in the latest years, but it's still very very rare as a reality in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to I don't have much to add to Sarah and Luca consideration, but I think when it comes to my experience with farms all over the world, I think automation in terms of being able to managing the scheduling of the irrigation is a must, especially for large farms. It's something that, and there are so many different solutions on the market. So I think we are much better off now than 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think I'm still a bit skeptic about automated solutions that schedule the irrigation automatically. I think still there is a human factor there that should be always control the irrigation, because we have so many factors in the vineyard involved, and as we spoke, there is weather, there is the vine status, soil. So I don't think we are solutions at the moment, but I can be wrong, that can take the summary of everything and automatically decide for the right scheduling of the irrigation. So as Luca said, we still have a long way to go in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think these are really good points. And I think something to add there as well is that economics are often a really big topic of discussion as well, especially when you're talking about, irrigation management or vineyard management that's automated. How do you think growers should think about the costs and economics of adopting new solutions, whether that's irrigation automation or some other form of automation in the vineyard?
Coming from the table grape experience, often irrigation is kind of neglected as an investment overall compared to other components of the vineyard. So as generally speaking, I think being irrigation, one of the biggest factor contributing to yield and quality of the vineyard should be also taken in high consideration and budget like a proper amount of money for the irrigation, including the automation. So that, generally speaking, that's my perception. Then, of course, that can vary a lot between regions and growers, and also the area. There are areas where there is more need of irrigation rather than others. So, but yeah, overall, I feel that to say this comment.
It's a really good question because budgeting around irrigation, we've already kind of talked about it. You have the labor part, which with automation, you're going to have labor to check for leaks, emitters. It's always going to be part of the system. I think when possible, automation helps to save that. You have it turned on when you want it turned on. In that multiple places can be turned on at the same time if it's possible for the system. And then you have labor checking and making sure that everything is working properly. And so it's a balance of perhaps it's less or the same amount of labor to use automation because you can have systems turned on automatically. You also have that data to track when it's been turned on and when it hasn't been turned on, which I think we're going to get to that part, but that is difficult to get that information. And if there are systems available that track irrigation records, that is something that is a really big need in the industry. And so from experience, the automation really helps because you have that data point that's already there. And so just balancing the pros and cons and the priorities of the vineyard and setting up the vineyard. Irrigation systems are very expensive to set up. So setting them up with that capability to start, you already have that ability. You can build in misting or sprinklers if available, if the water is there, if that's part of the plan, but it opens up for other opportunities.
I'd like to add to what Michele and Sara said, were very good points. It's true that water is a resource we are all concerned about. We know that it's finite and we need to be very wise in using that. In most areas, water is still not the largest cost. And so if you really go budget wise, there is not a very strong pressure in investing directly in that domain when you have other areas that could save more money if automated, right? It's true, you need the irrigators, they check on the system. That's very hard to automate in any case, at least for my understanding. You need someone really looking for problems. At the same time, it's a limited number of people compared to a crew that does canopy management or picks grapes. And so from that point of view, unfortunately, I agree with what Sarah says, that at this point in time, especially if you put a new system in, it's not very hard to add automation in. It does not really add a largest additional cost, and offers the benefit of being, future proof. At the same time, retrofitting current system, that's a different challenge. There's new tools on the market right now, new companies that offer systems that in some way are able to retrofit, but it's always if you could start from a fresh start, it's generally much more straightforward. So that's the problem on justifying in investment, I think, for growers in that space, is that the economic return of investment, it's a little bit more delayed or respect to what they could do if they put the same amount of money into another area. So I don't know. You don't record that, but water should cost more. That's the solution.
Yeah, that's a fair point, but I hope water doesn't cost any more than it already does. One interesting stat that we saw from in the past few months, the price of water in California jumped about 30% in just 1 month. And so a very sudden change, and I think definitely somewhat, a bit of a sign of volatility in terms of water prices, and something that, hopefully it doesn't, go up any more than it already has. But yeah, these are really great insights here, really about, cost and, the efficiency of that. Now, I think it goes to say as well that it's important to evaluate the performance of new practices or technologies that we use in the vineyard as well, especially when related to irrigation. So the next question here really is, what kinds of indicators are you looking at, whether that's quality, yield, or water use, or something else, to evaluate the performance of your new vineyard or irrigation management practices? How do you measure these indicators, and how do you benchmark it to understand what works best? Michele, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah. I really love this question, because that's the key of what I think what we do as a work as an agronomist or farm manager. Irrigation as other cultural practices are like driving tools, like the accelerator, the brake, the steering wheel. And so irrigation plays a big role in driving this car, which is the vineyard. So really it can help us to go faster or slower, depending how do we want to have the vineyard. So for me, I think is still valid and will be always valid. The best indicator is the balance of the vineyard. So whenever we have the vineyard in balance, we get the maximum results in terms of yield and quality. Okay, now, of course, the next question, what is the balance? How do we achieve the balance of the vineyard? Well, that's a very hard question to answer, and then I personally, in all my career, try to reach that. And there are, of course, research help us a lot in this, in giving us indicators. And it comes with, I don't know, the RAS index is something, but we work a lot with the shoot quality of the vineyard. That's a very good indicator that can tell us if the vine is in balance. And so if we have a good use of irrigation. For instance, we have many situations where the shoot quality that is low and is linked to poor irrigation before flowering, especially in arid area where they don't start with strong and high winter rain. Or when we have excess irrigation, which is very often happen in table grape vineyards, we have a poor linification of the shoot, and so, or high size. So I think getting the vine in balance is is looking for the balanced wine is one of the best indicators that we can have to tell if our practices are correct. And one of them, of course, is irrigation.
I think that's a really good point, Michele, about balance, vine balance that is key, right? It's it's for health of the vine, but it's also for producing quality fruit. And so just to add to your comments, I think the irrigation is one of the biggest levers that we have to pull in terms of controlling quality and shoot growth, and monitoring that monitoring it by the quality of the wine that it results from that. One of the biggest things is economics. And so if the grapes make it into the blend that you're planning on, that's a win. And being able to look back in terms of what were the practices done to get to that point, and looking at irrigation, looking at fertility, looking at canopy management. Those are other things to look at, but irrigation and the timing and looking at and responding to stress in a timely manner, or pushing that stress if that is appropriate for those vines, that is also key to look back on and make decisions and changes to the future vintages based on that.
Those are great awards here that you guys bring, and I'll just like to add that it's very good to have an idea of how we would like to approach irrigation without necessarily being frazzled about the current weather conditions, and of course we need to adjust as the canopy grows and during the season, and our plans that done at the beginning not necessarily respect, but it will be good to have an idea of what is the overall irrigation strategy we want to implement. Is there going to be a water stress before veraison, after veraison? We want to in general try to approach water use in a rational way, and not just, I have enough water this year, I can do 48-hour turns, or I have water this year, I'll need to do 12-hour turns. So I understand that, especially in high production areas, that's it's a way out growers cope with inconsistency in water supply, but at the same time, it's not necessarily the most rational approach and the ones that will necessarily pay on the long run. For premium areas, and I'm talking for wine grapes, there is generally a little bit more of a thought. But even then, if we talk about indicator, I think that we cannot really, at this point in time, really move from. I'm an aficionado of the pressure chamber, and even though it's a 60 years old tool, I think that's still like the most relevant and most understood system to really manage irrigation around. And ideally, I like that any sensor that is in the vineyard could translate that information into a pressure chamber water potential equivalent, because that's something that we have studied a lot. We know from a physiological standpoint, and so we know what will be the response of the plants to a changing that value. With other tools, there is a little bit more of a try on that the growers cannot necessarily afford, and there is not necessarily a large amount of information that could help guide them on. So yes, so that as indicators, I think that everybody picks the ones of their choice. I'll still pick a pressure bomb, and I'll try to have an idea of how to irrigate a vineyard, or at least what will be the ideal water potential curve that we would like to see in a perfect condition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks everyone for your thoughts here. These are really great. Now, with evaluating these new technologies and also measuring their performance also comes the risk of adopting new technologies or practices altogether. And so, to the panelists here, what are your thoughts on how growers can mitigate the risk of adopting or trying out a new type of cultural practice or irrigation technology?
I will start here since the company working, we are deal a lot with innovators. I think there are different type of growers and different type of risk that each grower can take in adopting new technology. So typically large growers can have the chance to try more technologies and see what fits best to the need. But I think for medium, small size grower, they need to risk the less possible, go with whatever is already has an important adoption in the market, or again, I strongly suggest them to speak with the advisor, agronomist, or researcher like Luca in order to be sure that whatever they are adopting has already a low risk of efficiency and functioning.
Good point. I think I'll just add, because I agree completely that the implementing a new system that comes with risks, but identifying what your value from that will be and being able to upfront see that if the value meets this criteria, if we're already saving X and we're getting this information from it, that's a success. And then going from there. So looking at it in a way that is, what is the value that using this new technology is the risk going to be so high that the value has the potential of being, just looking at the value from that, because the new technologies that are out there, it's benefiting from the information, benefiting from more efficiency. There is a lot of value from doing that, and maybe starting small, starting with a sample group, and then making sure that it works within the systems that are in place, and fine tuning that and growing from there. But yeah, like with anything with risk, just identifying that value that you're going to get from the beginning.
Thanks. And Luca, anything you want to add?
I just say that one of the questions that I receive the most from growers is, there is a large offer on the market. Which one is the sensor that works the best? And, there is not necessarily a very straightforward conclusion there. These sensors all work in different ways, and they be more or less adapted to each grower conditions. I agree with what Sarah said about starting small, and also with what Michele said, that not everybody has access to the same amount of technology because it's an investment and it depends on the size of the company or the vineyards that needs to be managed. And so in that sense, hopefully little by little, I see a lot of potential, we already said, in the remote sensing, because gives us more an opportunity to scale and to offer things for free. And there's a few services already there that needs to be still tailored because they are not necessarily efficient at this point in time or very truthful. But hopefully the research and the concerted work between the industry and academia will help move things forward in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for these thoughts. Now, moving on to our second last question here. This one really is more about just the current trends that are happening. So, Luca, as you mentioned earlier today, you said water is still inexpensive in many places, which is true. However, we're also starting to see regulatory pressure on growers in certain areas, like in California with Sigma. So, especially to Sarah and Luca here, what do you think growers need to know about regulations like Sigma, and what should they be really thinking about when they're trying to be compliant with it, trying to record things like water use on a vineyard?
I can speak more towards the just approaching it. The regulations are not my strong suit at the moment. So there, I'm sure, are other people who can address that. But in terms of looking forward, like we mentioned, more efficiency with water usage is going to be critical. It's and we're already on that path in terms of having multiple years of drought, but monitoring in terms of monitoring how much water has been applied is going to be key. When it's been applied and also how much. So I know the use of flow meters, the use of automation tools to record that information has been very helpful. But tracking, even if it's on paper or a system of when each block is being irrigated, and some complication or complexities around that are we use a second line, we have emitters, not for every vine on those cases. So fine tuning how much water is actually going out, being more efficient with that, and making the decisions in terms of the information that's available from sensors, from VidTechs, from context that's coming in. Just being efficient with that information.
I'll add to that yes, there is a strong pressure in trying to be more efficient into water saving, into saving water for irrigation. I think that there is margin to maintain similar yields that we have by adjusting our irrigation practices in a more rational way, and without any detriment to the quality as well. So we have margins to work on in that sense. There are new tools that I think that will be good for the industry to adopt, that can give us an idea of how much water is in a well, for example. And this is something that is still not very common. And of course, there is some regulation on that, but the regulation is necessarily on the flow, not on the amount of water that is pulled out in irrigation cycle. So that will be an information that I think any grower will benefit of, because the growers are the first one to be concerned about having enough water for ensuring the sustainability of their operation on the long run. Nobody wants to run out of water. There's improvement into the efficiency of irrigation systems, and I think that I personally, for a few trials I've done in the past, I believe that subsurface irrigation has potential to, help provide more water with the same drop in a way, in the sense that that has a high return to the plant respect to traditional drip. And so I think that there is, of course, a lot of pressure as an additional constraint to the grower. In irrigation, there was not necessarily that pressure before, and only a consistency of water supply was the main driver of irrigation decisions. Now we have other things to think about. And yes, water can be inexpensive when you have water and you have wells, but of course it's not inexpensive when you are using surface water and depending on your irrigation district as well. And unfortunately, grapevine is a plant that needs to grow every year, cannot be put in and out when you have water and when you don't. So we need to be all together. We need to try to work the best we can in ensuring the viability of these plants for years to come.
Perfect. All right. That's really great. Now, moving on to our last question here. So we are wrapping this up now. So to all our panelists here, what is the most important or most actionable idea that growers can take away from our discussion today? Michele, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, irrigation is important factor for achieving good yields and good quality, whatever type of grape we are talking about, table grape and wine grape. But always this needs to be correlated to other vineyard practices, from nutrition to canopy practices. Everything is interlinked. So we cannot think to fix the irrigation management that we have in our vineyard without also considering the pruning load, the units of nitrogen that we are using, and everything else. That makes even harder to fix the irrigation management, but also I think that's the key. And also it is important to look into each own historical data to get to this answer, how to properly manage all the cultural practices with irrigation. It's very unlikely that the answer will come from outside your own farm. You really need to manage internally the management.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway that I would want growers to have from this conversation is looking at the plan of vineyards, tools that you have available. So not only evaluating the sensors that you're using, the data that's being collected and how it's being collected, but also the systems that are in place for using that information. And just like Michele mentioned, of integrating that information with the plan for canopy management for the other portions of farming that are being decided. So just evaluating the sensors, tools, and those systems.
Yeah, to that I'll add that I think, taking care in how you collect your own data, understand that the data you collect are of value, and that in the future, your ability to have access to a large and diverse and long, meaning like long in history, data set will make the difference into your ability to leverage some of the artificial intelligence or other analytics tools that will be able to make a difference into the way we farm, at least help support decisions. So I think that's very important. Just consider that the data is not second side in your job, but is actually another product of your own farming operation that you need to take care of. I also like that being ready to automate irrigation. It's definitely important in new plantings, and something that having a well-designed irrigation system makes a lot of difference later on in the ability to irrigate in a precise way, at least at the block level. And that's something that an investment that will pay off in the long run. Imagine you have an heat wave and you would like to irrigate, precisely during this event, and you know that to irrigate your field, you just cannot. So it's like, that's the where automation comes in place, I think, just to give you like a very straightforward example. And another thing is that, yes, there is a lot of technology for irrigation scheduling. All of them have value in a way or another, but as Michele also said, at this point in time, they are not really able to completely replace an agronomist in the field, as also Sarah said, the contextual information, or overall just the experience of people on the ground. Those are additional tools to help us learn about our conditions that we can make sense, that can help create a feeling with the growing season and the conditions, but not necessarily a tool that we should follow blindly on. And finally, I think that if we all put more thought into the way we irrigate, then all in all, we will be able to safeguard the resource while at the same time maintaining yield and quality that help the industry thrive.
All right, well, we end off here on a strong note. Those are really helpful and actionable pieces of advice from all of our panelists. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today and for having such an insightful discussion. And thank you to our audience as well for joining us here today. We hope you got a lot out of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.